if you want to imagine a vision of the future, just imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
Is the sloppening really happening? Today, I'm chatting with Joe Burns about the rise of generative AI and what it means for us brand builders. Buckle up and let's talk branding.
The Sloppening.
Yeah, I'm Joe. I'm a strategist. I work at a creative agency called Quality Meets Creative. We're an independent agency. And yeah, so my output, the flipbooks, I think I started doing it a year ago now, and they've become really popular. I think it started with a few different things kind of all coming together, and they've just kind of naturally fallen into this rhythm of me posting up these things. I think a big one was I like making things, so it gave me something that I could make. I think another thing was this idea that strategy is so bad for not taking its own medicine. We'll present a 150 slide presentation full of charts that's trying to tell clients that they need to be single-minded and clear and emotional. And it's just like, well, why aren't you doing that then? Is that kind of how I respond to that stuff? So it was applying the principles of what strategy says that you should do to strategy. So that was a big part of it. And then I think the last reason I started doing them was because I've just got very little faith in the existing institutions and structures of power that exist to navigate through the future. You get what I mean? Basically, I think I mean that I was just like, I just want to get some ideas out there and get thinking out there, and maybe be a little bit disruptive, and maybe put out some thinking that I think is needed out in the world. I think the thing for me is I think we've been living through, up until maybe 2008, a period of history where the most important qualities for a system and the people controlling that system are no longer as relevant as they were. And a lot of the crises and collapses that we're seeing in society, I point the finger at the systems of power and the people at the top of those systems of power and their inability to navigate the world as it is now. You know what I mean? And I think that's a big driver for me. Is well, I'm just a guy making silly bucks on LinkedIn, but maybe those things can have an effect, and I can connect with other people, and we can maybe build stuff together, or they can change people's minds and make them think in a new way. So it's a little bit iconoclastic, I'll admit, but yeah, and each one is designed to be a engaging, nicely wrapped up, well packaged kind of strategic output. Just delivering an idea in a way that people want to engage with and is interesting to them. So they're the ingredients that went into this, and I've just been learning as I go, really.
Yeah, I mean, they're fascinating, and for the people listening, you can't really see, but go have a look at Joe's LinkedIn page, and of course they'll be in the show notes. But what's interesting to me as well is that each of them is a bit like their own little visual universe, and I'm guessing to create them, generative AI has been probably one of those things that helped you do this in a way that maybe wasn't possible maybe 5 years or 10 years ago. But can you share just a little bit of the behind the scenes of how you make them? I think some people might be very curious.
Sure. I mean, I think it's a reflection of how I think and do stuff. So some people, and I'm not this at all, but I think there's an assumption baked into the way that work happens, which is that people think in a very linear way. And it's I make a structure, and then I plot out the beats in the structure, and then I go and do this. And it's a kind of waterfall process at an individual level. And my brain just doesn't work like that at all. I really struggle to think in that linear way. And usually what happens is that linear storytelling component comes right at the end for me. So I usually just start out with a vibe and a song in my head and a visual idea of what I'm thinking about what's inside of me is very abstract. And then like I just start to play around with generative AI or typography and design. And I use design, typography, art, music, and visual stuff as a way of working out like what that abstract sensation is inside of me. And then eventually that probably forms into like into a statement or an idea or something that's a little bit more crystallized and easy to communicate. So like that's how I think for everything, whether I'm doing a messaging matrix for a brand or whatever. Like I always try and start in the most kind of abstract and primordial almost place. So generative AI has been amazing for me because I can kind of like concoct a world that doesn't necessarily make much sense yet, and then like explore around it. And like, you know, I did one of the flip books I did was on the entropy economy, and like that is a big part of that was this hypothetical card game between Machiavelli and Isaac Newton. And like it's before AI, you can kind of it take a long time to kind of like work that out, and you probably have to read a load of textbooks and stuff. But with Gen AI, I could just like plug into ChatGPT. I was like, write me a fictional hypothetical card game, and then that just becomes a piece of STEM. And then you can start playing around with Midjourney is what I use, and just like playing around trying to get the imagery right. And it's to me, Gen AI has been amazing because it allows me to work in a way that's much closer to how I'm naturally inclined to work, rather than try and work in a very structured, linear way. And like, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with working in a structured, linear way, but it tends to take you to places that are kind of expected, and our jobs are about the unexpected and that never been done before, rather than like. And I just think that process of like thinking through things in a very linear way is best left until the end, when you've done the exploration job of thinking more abstractly.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me a bit of this concept of like emergent strategy versus deliberate strategy. And a lot of what you're saying is like kind of let it happen and things will come to you, and let the things take shape as you go. And I think indeed, like a lot of times we pitch this glorified idea of going in your process and it's all very nicely structured. Maybe like let's dive into the one that got me personally, like the first flip book that I was like really like, okay, this is something, this guy is like thinking in a different way, in an interesting way. And that was the Sloppening. Like, what is the Sloppening? Like, what tell us a bit about that.
Well, that's something it's funny you should say that, because that's something I started working on 9 months before I actually did the one that I posted. And the original, it was always called the Sloppening, because I thought that's just a great name for what's going on. But, and this is to your point about emergent strategy. I was just thinking about, there's that quote in 1984 by George Orwell. And it's, you know, if you want to imagine a vision of the future, just imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. And like, I was thinking about that. And the reason I was thinking about that was because of, you know, you get those weird ads for like mobile phone games where it'll be like a king tied up and then pulling, and they're just these weird, crazy, I'm not, how are these things being made? And then I kind of, in my head, I came up with this little ditty of just like, if you want to imagine a vision of the future, imagine a thumb tapping on a mobile game ad forever. Do you know what I mean? And like, that was the start of that thing. And I was like, well, what's going on there? Why is this image and this line emerging in my mind? And I think it's just like this idea of a dystopia where we just overrun with slop. And slop to me, and I wanted to define what slop is, because everyone can, slop's a bit like that famous quote about the US lawyer or whatever, where the US court judge who's like, I don't know what pornography is, but I know it when I see it. You know what I mean? And like, I think we were in that state of being when it comes to what is slop. And I wanted to define slop in a way that was useful to us so we could spot it and avoid it. And I think I landed on, which to me I think is the right definition of what slop is. It's content that's produced only to move a metric rather than to have an objective that metric's designed to measure. So it's like anything that's content that's produced and put out in the world that doesn't serve an objective, it's just designed to increase a metric, clicks, likes, shares, whatever. There's no deeper purpose to it. And I think with that definition combined with what you can easily do with AI, you can really see how if we set out to move metrics, and I don't know if you saw the thing recently, but Mark Zuckerberg said like, oh, clients, marketers will be able to plug into Facebook their objective and then we'll do the rest and their budget, And like, this stuff's getting worse, man. Because like in the Sloppening, I'm talking about, well, actually, if you just set out to increase a metric, then you'll just produce slop to increase that metric, rather than anything that actually affects the objective that sits behind it. And then this Zuckerberg quote comes out where he's saying that. And I just think like that to me tells me everything I need to know about like where we're at as a industry, because I'm pretty sure that what he's talking about there isn't objectives, it's metrics. And like if we're at the point as an industry where people who control these giant platforms and a large proportion of the people working in that industry don't understand the difference between an objective and a metric, we are screwed. Do you know what I mean? Because like that is basic stuff that you should learn in school before you even start working. And you've got people who are on maybe 7-figure salaries not understanding this stuff. It's insane. It's shocking. And like that to me that's what the danger is. I think it'll come out in the wash over the longer view of things, because like that way of operating it will get outmaneuvered by people who do have the understanding to do stuff. But like that to me is like, that's what the sloppening is all about. It's like confusing metrics and objectives and optimizing on the metrics and not even thinking about the objectives. And then like all of the trends that you see, and like I said, the Zuckerberg quote about plug in your objective and some budget and then we'll do the rest. To me, that like really loudly says that the sloppening is upon us.
Yeah, I mean, I love that, and I think it's like a big part indeed of like what I'm starting to see also with like a lot of the content and the imagery that is now being produced. Like you can obviously see people using like very basic ChatGPT imagery, and it all looks the same, and it almost feels like this just more sea of sameness with different tools. And that's interesting to me because on the one hand, there's people like you that are able to use this technology to create visually distinct and pleasing content that really stands out, and on the other hand, it's bringing like a wave of crap towards us, I guess. And like I'm wondering how you feel about that part. Like is it really about the AI that is making things so bland, or is it just us humans using it in the wrong way, and maybe what is the right way to use them?
I think this is just like a change that we're seeing, and it's good and it's bad. I don't think it's. I'm actually been working. As you can imagine, I've probably got a dozen ideas for things that are just sitting there waiting to be made. I don't have time to just knock them out daily, but like one of them is this. It's like the most powerful thing about AI and the worst thing about AI is the same thing. And it's that AI never ever says, "Are you sure about that?" Because like back to what I was kind of saying at the start about like institutional power and the systems that are in place at the minute, they did a really good job of gatekeeping stuff. In fact, they did such a good job of gatekeeping stuff that it kept out a lot of bad stuff and probably got rid of a lot of potentially good stuff as well, right? Because good ideas, the best, let's say the best ideas, the top 5% of ideas, when someone first has those ideas or those ideas first emerge from a group of people, most people think it's just crazy, weird, stupid. Do you know what I mean? Like most people are going to be like, because they don't have the imagination and can't see where that idea is going to go and what the real potency of it. If it was obvious, if that idea was obvious, someone would have had it all already, you know?
Yeah.
And AI is going to completely get rid of that gatekeeping. So, like, what we'll probably see is that top 2% of like brilliant ideas that were just too good to be sold through the structures that used to exist. Like, they were just too advanced for people to kind of give a green light to. They'll probably find a way to get made now because people will have AI to make them. At the same time, the 20% bottom of ideas that are terrible are also going to get made because AI doesn't say, like, are you sure about that? So I think it's just going to change the dynamics of like ideas and what gets made. And I think we're going to adapt the way we engage with content and like probably become a little bit more discerning about what we engage with as a result of it. But it's going to happen. So like, it's a bit of an is-ought distinction thing. I think it's like, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? I think that's kind of a difficult question to answer, but it's definitely going to happen. So like, be prepared.
Yeah, and that's where, like, for me it's interesting. I just put out this documentary film on mascots, and like, let's say 70-80% of the people were just like, hey, it's a great video and really fun, I enjoyed it. But there was some like generative AI stuff in there, some B-rolls I generated and some fun stuff, and like a good 30% of the comments was like, actually funny, like AI slop and AI sloppily, and like, this is terrible, and how can you do this as an artist, and like you're running, the whole, there's a whole hate around this. And I'm like, I'm really wondering, like, and I don't know if you have a take on it, but like, first off, like, how big is this group of people we think? And also, secondly, like, how do you deal with it as a creative? Like, because sometimes I do feel like, hey, maybe I am on the wrong side of this, and maybe I shouldn't be using this stuff. And like, yeah, just curious about your take on that.
Yeah, it is a difficult thing because ultimately, and I think this is the way I see it is ultimately all it does is it just reduces the barrier to including things into something you're going to make. And like, I find it really strange that so much of the discussion and conversation about AI is going like, hey, they'll be able to make films for less money and faster. And I'm like, that just seems like a weird. Films are good. Why would you change that? But what it does mean is, instead of just making a short text-based thing, you can make it more engaging and visual. So it's like, to me, the great thing about AI is it opens up a massive long tail of spaces and places for different types of ideas where previously you couldn't put an idea in there. You know what I mean? Like, that, I think, is where it's cool. Like, I post these flipbooks on LinkedIn, and the lifespan of these is 48 hours. So, like, you'd never spend 3 months going out and shooting photographs for something that people look at for 30 seconds, and then the lifespan of it from a content point of view is only 48 hours. That's insane. So, like, so to me, I think my argument is that it's like, yeah, I could make a film documentary about that, but I've got a full-time job and I don't really think this idea is worth a full documentary. Maybe I'll collect a few of them and make a book at some point, and like, that won't be visual, that'll be text-based or whatever. And it's just, to me, the beauty of AI is it opens up new spaces and places to put ideas that are more engaging, not that it can make cheaper, slightly crappier versions of things that we already invest time and effort in. And I think to your question about like that 20 to 30% of people who are like, oh, AI slop, it's like, I think they're just judging, and they've got the wrong judgment criteria. Like, they're judging your documentary film like it's a HBO documentary, you know what I mean? Where it's like, and the response then is like, if HBO or the BBC or whatever want to come and give me $1 million to make this into a documentary, I won't use AI. They don't, so I'm just going to make it with AI. Do you get what I mean? It's like,
I promise.
Yeah, yeah, sure, I'll make it, and we can get the rights for all the footage, and we can do it that way. But HBO haven't called me up and offered me $1 million yet, so I'll just do it for $10 on ChatGPT. You get what I mean? It's like,
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think it's interesting, like what you see a lot now. Like, I mean, I've been working in house at a company where it's like we're also thinking a lot about, how can we use AI in marketing and in the whole company basically to be more efficient, but also to be more creative, to do more stuff. And then you see a lot of platforms that are like, hey, you're just gonna be able to produce ads in no time. And obviously, I'm guessing your take is like that. That's not per se a good thing there, but I'm wondering, like, just in today's space, like, what does it take to make a good ad?
oh god, man, that's a great question. That's a really good question because so much of the time and a lot of the stuff I post and comment on and create, it's actually not directly advertising. It might indirectly took it. I honestly think like the ingredients for a good ad are the same as they've ever been, and also similar to what it takes to make good content, which is like it's the two P's, let's call it. It's personality and perspective. Like that's ultimately all it comes down to. It's like have a perspective on a thing and then deliver that perspective with a personality that's unique and different. And like that's all there really is to it. Like if you want to talk about what it takes to have effective advertising, which is a slightly different question, I think it's applying that personality and perspective to a really interesting problem. There you go. We've already got the 4 P's of marketing, but like I've got the 3 P's of what makes a good effective ad, which is like finding a really interesting and smart problem to solve, and then solving it with a new perspective on what you can do to solve it, and with the right kind of personality that people find compelling. So like the media channels are shifting, the problems that you're solving are shifting, but that kind of personality element is still crucial. And like I was chatting to someone the other day, and to me, the best creative idea in the communications world of the last decade is Spotify Wraps. I just think it's brilliant,
Yeah.
because it's still got everything that a great ad has in terms of it's delivered with personality. The brand's got a nice tone and a sense of humor. It's got a sense of perspective, which is almost like the music you listen to tells you a lot and is almost a soundtrack to what's gone on in your year. But I think the real clever thing about it is it's a creative idea that's designed for a world of systems rather than a world of linear stories in mass media. And like, just to kind of play back a little bit of what you were doing when you were setting context for the question of saying like working within agencies and like the challenges that agencies have and wanting to be more efficient. Agencies, the problem isn't that they're inefficient, and they are inefficient. It's true. The problem is, and this is the problem that plagues agencies, and the real issue is that in order to do twice as much stuff, agencies need to work twice as hard, and that to me is not a business model. Do you get what I mean? If I had to work twice as hard to do twice as much stuff, I'd just got a treadmill. I've got a problem on my hands. If I work for 1 hour and I can produce 10 widgets, if I can only produce 20 widgets in 2 hours, I don't consider that a business model. It doesn't work out in my head. If I can produce 100 widgets, if every 100% increase in time and effort spent results in like 1,000% increase in output, then you've got a business, And like agencies just like they've not solved that problem. So their only solution is either work harder or reduce the costs. And like I think what we'll probably see within the next 2 to 5 years is agencies really understanding that if they don't solve that problem, they're screwed. And like we'll see agencies starting investing more into, and AI is going to make it really easy for them to do that. I think it's just, but agencies have always been really hesitant to apply creativity to the way they operate, which is the big irony about agencies. It's like, yeah, we're the most creative people in the world, except for anything to do with how we do things, which is like a cottage industry from the 60s still. So like, I think AI is just going to force the change there because it's so there's so much capability to do that scaling job, and there's so much capability of it to kind of make the processes more efficient that I think it will force evolution. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what's going to be interesting to see is like how the role evolves a bit of like I see a lot of companies pushing to be more like in-house autonomously. Like now you have some tools that you allow you to, you know, do a lot of stuff in-house, but like the one thing that a lot of companies don't have in-house is that creativity that maybe some agencies bring to the table. And that's where, like, for me it's interesting, and I'd be curious for both perspectives. Like if you are an in-house marketer, like what would be your advice on how to tackle this and you know, help the brand stand out and be creative? And on the other hand, also of course your take on like whether it's a good idea to go full in-house and that sort of stuff.
We actually Quality Meets actually work with a lot of clients with in-house teams.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're in a way set up to that. You know, I think if you think about old school big ad agencies with like 300 plus people in them, like they're really, really good for clients with like a regular cadence of pretty formulaic stuff that's going out the door. You know what I mean? Like that scale of the agency. I'm talking more creative here rather than like the holding company that holds it. But like a big, chunky 300 plus person agency is fantastic if you're the kind of brand who knows they're going to have 4 campaigns a year. There's always going to be a 30-second TV spot and 600 different banners for that thing. And like that's going to happen. And you just want to hand that over to a specialist group of people, that big chunky agency that can then matrix into your business and just like churn that stuff out. Like, but I don't think that big agency was ever good at servicing smaller clients with more unusual and different problems. And those smaller clients tend to have, you know, either they're either very small startup-y type things or scale-up type things, or they maybe have their own in-house teams who handle the banners and things like that.
Yeah.
And actually, like, we've found that we work really well with those kind of clients as a kind of plug-in because there's so little intermediation. You know, like thinking about that big old school agency, they always used to make it look like a ladder. So it'd be like you'd have the CMO who talked to the CCO, you'd have do you know what I mean? And then like you'd have a layer of account management that formed a ladder shape across with every layer within the client's organization, right? And we don't have that at all. You know, at Quality Meets, we're not got some kind of ladder structure. It's called top to top, and it's basically just the clients who've got the problem speak to the people who are solving the problem. It's that simple. And like what that means is if there are internal creative teams, they can then plug in and be part of the process as well. So it allows us to work with clients with in-house teams. And like we did the GoDaddy Super Bowl campaign this year, and that they've got a big in-house team who produce a lot of marketing assets. So yeah, I think that it depends on what kind of client you are and what kind of problem you're facing, and like how much you want to hand that over to an external partner and what kind of partner it is. I know that's a bit of like a how long's a piece of string answer, but like as an organization, we like working with in-house teams. And I think the flip side of that is as well, we're very entrepreneurial as an agency. And I think this is another thing that AI and all the other changes that are happening right now, it massively increases the value of entrepreneurialism, right? And like, you know, this is an extremely reductive piece of thought that I'm going to say now, so apologies. But like, I think you can broadly divide people's skills into 3 buckets. And like, everyone has a different selection of skills, but like, bucket number 1 is following instructions. Are you really good at diligent at following instructions? AI is better than any human being ever at that. So like that skill set becomes completely. It's like if all you can do is follow instructions, then AI is not looking good. The second, I think, big skill bucket is like knowledge arbitrage. So knowing things and then giving those things that you know to people. Now, like, I think what's going to be really interesting with AI is open knowledge. If the things you know about a public domain, then yeah, again, your skills have just been commoditized completely. If your knowledge is in a closed domain, then actually you become, relatively speaking, far more valuable. So like if you're in closed groups of people who talk and come up with new ideas, which is kind of what an ad agency is, really, ultimately, then that becomes extremely valuable as long as those ideas don't become part of like the open network. And then the third skill set, I think, is just being able to make things. And they could be software things, or they could be like knowledge things, or they could be physical things. And I think being able to make things, actually, you become way more powerful because of AI. So like, to me, they're the three kind of buckets of skill, and like AI changes the balance of those things completely. So I think agencies are going to have to adjust. Clients are going to have to adjust. There's a question of like, what do we want the agency for? And to me, because of those shifts, it's like, if you want your agency to just like, you tell them something and they go and make it, that's probably just like no longer a kind of viable positioning from an agency. If that agency is selling a unique perspective and knowledge that only exists in that closed environment, that becomes more valuable. And if the agency is full of entrepreneurial people who like to make things and do things, that becomes more valuable too. So I think that relationship between client and agency is going to become much less transactional, because AI is going to do all the transactional, go make this thing, don't think stuff. So like, it's an interesting time.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I like the fact that like you put people in that third bucket of like makers, people that love to tinker and do stuff, in a bucket that's like not easily replaced, because a lot of times we tend to think that, well, you're a 3D designer, you're done. You're an illustrator, you're done. Well, actually, I believe that, if these people keep on creating stuff in a non-obedient way, then definitely there's a lot of value in what they do. Maybe just to like, I think it could be an interesting bridge to one of your other flip books, where I think it's called Kiss My Asset. And just to jump to the last point where you said, like, it's not just about deciding how much to make, but it's more about deciding what to make, and the role of strategy within that. And I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit, because I think it's an important part of this.
Yeah, I mean, this is just something that I've noticed. If you're a strategist in a creative agency, you work with a lot of creatives. And to me, the most frustrating question a creative can ask is just like, what are the deliverables? Because what that tells me is like, as soon as a creative asks that question, it kind of tells me that they're not really thinking about what they've got to do. They're thinking about like filling in the boxes and just shipping it. You know what I mean? It shows me that they're not really engaging with the meaningful part of what they're being asked to do, which is like, can you solve this problem in a way that's creative? They're just thinking like, okay, if I just put a funny thing in this box, then job done. We can ship it out the door. And like, to me, it's not just frustrating as a strategist, because you're like, hey guys, we've got to solve this. Is the problem that we're being paid to solve here? Like, let's engage with that, and then we can work out the specific formats and deliverables and versions that we need to do. That's downstream of the ideas. And it's not just personally irritating. It's also like a highway to becoming a vendor that's going to be replaced by AI. Like, the more we frame the job as like filling out a media plan, the more we devalue the thing that is the human component of the job, which is like working out how to solve the problem or working out the way of grabbing people's attention or whatever. So, yeah, I think the other thing is, and I think this is going to be a brilliant thing that AI ushers in, is if you look over even just over my career of like 15 to 20 odd years in advertising, if I look at the change in a marketing plan from then to now, it's insane how much more complicated it is. Almost, but I think like the tools and systems and processes that are in place to help creative agencies deliver on those complicated marketing plans just aren't there, And I always also, if I was being punchy, I've been a little bit spiky and punchy on this podcast already, so why stop there? But like, I almost think as well that the systems thinking talent isn't in the industry enough, and like, again, it's very broad brushstrokes. Like, there's certain people I think in a very linear way. They're great storytellers, those kind of people, because like we experience time in a linear way usually, unless you've been to an ayahuasca ceremony recently. You're usually going through time in a very linear way. Tuesday comes after Mondays most of the time, right? And as a result, stories in our heads work in that way. But systems thinkers, they don't really experience things in that way. They think much more in a top-down. It's much more Bandersnatch, or like for the Black Mirror thing, or like they think probabilistically and understand how systems connect to each other. And modern media plans and modern marketing plans, they're a systems thinking operation, right? But the stuff that goes in them is the most highly linear thinking imaginable. It's stories, whether that's a poster or a 5-second TikTok reel or a 30-second TV ad. They're linear stories usually. Like, very rarely you'll have something that isn't. Spotify Wrapped being a great example of a systems-based idea rather than a story-based idea. And to me, what hopefully AI will allow us to do is plug in more of that systems thinking and systems design into marketing plans in smarter ways, because it's still very unsophisticated how those two elements are brought together. And like, not just in terms of the thinking and the strategic stuff that sits around that. We still send WeTransfer files, man. WeTransfer files with friggin' with PNGs in them. It's
that always expire when you need them.
But you know what I mean? It's like, or a Dropbox link, and it's just like, are we still in a process where to come up with a creative idea, people sit around in a Google Doc, show the Google Doc to the client, go back to the Google Doc, make some changes, show it to the client again. The client says, great. Then we turn those things into something you can test. You take that to an audience and test it. Then you go back to a Google Doc and change the thing again. And then you make a final version that you save on a cloud server, put in a Dropbox and send to the media agency. And like, I am but a lowly strategist, and I can see that is a terrible, crappy, inefficient way of doing things. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
There must be a better way to integrate those different components of creative ideation, research validation, client approvals, asset delivery, and media. Like, we could probably sit around for an afternoon and come up with a better system. And if some venture capital firm then lent us $12 million, probably turn it into a thing. But you get what I mean? Like,
yeah.
My point is, it's like you look around at the systems that we have in place in the advertising and marketing industry, and like, anyone can see the problems. The work twice as hard to make twice as hard, they make much stuff. That's a problem. There's no scaling. The inefficient system of like getting from brief to asset is just a huge inefficiency. And like, I think this is what I mean about when I was being spiky, I'll be honest, at the start of the thing. And I was saying, I don't have much faith in the existing institutions and systems of power. I think they're just looking at things of like, oh, we can just replace the people component with AI. And like, genuinely, I think a lot of these people, they would just, in their head, it's an AI making a Google Doc and then an AI saving things to a Dropbox. It's just like, maybe we could build a better system that still retained human interaction. And maybe the problem is this really janky old linear process that's just like woefully inefficient Anyway,
Yeah.
so that's my soapboxy rant about things there.
No, but it's so true. I see a lot of these diagrams where it's like we're building an agency, and it's like all the people just got replaced by agents,
Yeah.
and it's like, what are you doing? Like, that's not really, I think, how it should be. But anyway, maybe like one more thing. I think, I mean, this podcast, there is a lot of people thinking about like brands in a strategic way, and one of your other flip books was about like keeping it stupid simple,
Yeah.
and how to be a great strategist. And I really love that because I think it connects well to everything you said about like how to interact with these new tools and how to look at this brave new world, what we can call it. So yeah, I think that would be a great way to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think everyone can benefit from strategic thinking, and I think every strategist can benefit from making things. Like that's ultimately to me. Like I hate opinion havers, and I realize I say that as a man who has a lot of opinions, but at least I turn them into something that I can throw out there. I just think like that idea that you can have this kind of patrician class of people who go around just having opinions on things, I find really
The thought leaders.
the thought leaders, yeah. And I say that as someone who occasionally gets called that, but like I just don't think I like to make things. I think everyone who makes things should be helped to think strategically. So like that's what I was trying to do there, is just kind of like really capture the skills that make someone a good strategist and what that's all about in a way that encourages people to make stuff, and also is really applicable if you're a copywriter or a graphic designer or a 3D object builder or whatever it might be. It's like, I think those strategic skills, let's call them, they're really applicable to anyone, because it's just like noticing things, making stuff up that doesn't exist already, and then packaging it up in a way that's interesting and compelling to people. Like that to me is like the core skill set of strategy, and I think everyone can benefit from that. Yeah, some people can be a specialist strategist and that's what they do. Like, if you're starting up a B2B software as a service brand, yeah, get a strategist in and they can probably help you make a really good pitch deck. Do you know what I mean? Get a strategist in and they can probably help you define what your messaging architecture should be on social media. Or maybe you're a big brand and you need to reach a new consumer that's a different audience to what you normally sell to. A strategist can probably help make some things that will help you do that better. But I actually think that strategy is one of those things that can be democratized, and anyone can just be like, oh yeah, I can notice things, I can make stuff up, and I can put it in weird boxes, And I think the flip side of that is that strategists can package their stuff up and make it more transferable as well. So yeah, that's what I was getting at with that. And I think those skills become more valuable again because of those trends with AI. It's like anyone can make anything pretty quickly now. Vibe coding is going to be huge.
Yeah.
Like this is going to be, like, I don't think anyone realizes how big of a shift vibe coding, if it actually gets really good, is going to make. Because like I could be like, oh, my client needs a social listening app, and we could just vibe code a social listening app, and then it solves the problem of scalability for agencies as well, because if you've got an agency team of people who can vibe code a tool, you don't have to just give that to the client as a deliverable in a Dropbox file. You can be like, okay, pay us $100 a month for this tool now. Do you get what I mean? Like,
yeah,
and that changes the equation for agencies. So I think strategy is going to become more important because there's more tools to make stuff without having to execute it, But that then therefore means that strategists need to become more executional, if they want to survive. If they do
get your hands dirty.
Yeah. If you're a strategist and you do manage to crack execution, then you just become the most valuable person in the building, because you can understand and notice where there's room for a new idea, define what that new idea can be, and then just make it because you vibe code it straight off the bat. So if you can master that executional side of things, you become extremely valuable. And like you're able to, not just within creative agencies, but for clients as well. And like you can build IT products for You know what I mean? Like, to me, that's like, oh wow, strategy gets really, really cool now. All of a sudden, like, I can say to a client, oh yeah, let's do this social media monitoring tool, for example. It's like you can build them a social media monitoring tool that will surface any relevant comment from a user on Reddit or Twitter or whatever, and immediately present the client with like, and here's what the response should be based on a brand guidelines that we built and baked into the thing as well. It's like, is that taking a copywriter's job? No. What is that actually doing? It's taking the really frustrating, horrible bit of the copywriter's job and allowing them to focus on making a really cool brand guidelines that kind of define it. So, like, yeah, I think your role as a strategist becomes really exciting and cool thanks to all this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much more stuff we could dig into, but I guess we've had enough strategic cold cuts for today. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for coming on the show, Joe.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure to chat. Like I said, hopefully I wasn't too spiky at the front and too iconoclastic, but like, I think now is the time where there's just huge shifts happening, and like all the playbooks and the ways of thinking of the past, some of them are going to have to be amended, at the very least. So yeah, it's an exciting time for people who don't like following rules, which I think I am. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't like just doing things how they've always been done and following the rules, now is the best time,
Well, amen. Disobedience for all of you. Thanks so much, Joe.
Thanks, Sam.